It was 2:14 a.m. in the Appalachian Mountains of eastern Tennessee. I heard a creepy female scream came from nowhere high on the ridge above our campsite, and it sounded so horrible that I froze with one boot half on. My friend Alex, who was deep asleep beside me, walked up, and neither of us could see anything beyond the thin nylon walls of our tent. At first, I told myself it was a fox. 20 minutes later, the same scream came from across the creek. My heart beat so fast that I felt like it will came out from my chest. Then, less than 70 feet away, it came again. That was when I realized whatever was making that sound had not just moved closer, it had been moving around us. Let me tell you the full story. My name is Jordan. I grew up hiking and I have spent more nights sleeping in the Appalachian Mountains than I can honestly count. I am 27 and I am an environmental science grade student. I also work as a teaching assistant for a couple of undergrad ecology sections, which means by the time early September rolled around last year, September 2024, I was totally burnt out. Between syllabus week and grading introductory quizzes, I just needed a break. My buddy Alex and I had been planning a 2 night backpacking trip for a while, mostly just to get away from screen and Wi Fi. We chose a spot in the Cherokee National Forest over in eastern Tennessee. It's a gorgeous area, heavily wooded, lots of steep ridges and clear creeks. We hiked out maybe 6 or 7 miles from the trailhead to our designated backcountry campsite. It was supposed to be low key. We brought a small camp stove, some dehydrated meals, and a lightweight 2% tent we usually split to keep our pack weights down. The first day and night were completely standard. We set up camp near the creek, made dinner, and crashed around 9:30. The second day we did a hike out to a waterfall, leaving our heavy gear at the site. By the time we got back, it was late afternoon. We filtered water, ate, and packed up our food in a beer bag. Since my background is in environmental science, I am usually obnoxious about beer safety. I made sure we hung the food bag properly on a high branch about 50 yards downwind from our tent. The bag was 12 feet off the ground and 5 feet out from the trunk. You pull it up on a paracord system so a bear can't just climb the trunk and sweat it down. I tied it off securely and we headed back to the tent. We didn't have any cell service. Obviously, I was exhausted, so I fell asleep pretty much the second I zipped myself into my sleeping bag. I woke up some time later because I had to pee. I grabbed my phone to use the screen as a dim flashlight so I wouldn't wake Alex. It was 2:14 a.m. Battery was at 40%. I remember that because I made a mental note to leave it on airplane mode the next day so it wouldn't die before we got back to my car. I was just putting my boots on when the first scream happened. It sounded incredibly loud. It was a high, shredded, shrieking noise, like a woman screaming at the top of her lungs, ending in a red gargle. It was maybe a couple of hundred yards away, somewhere up the ridge to the north of our site. Alex jolted up in his sleeping bag. He was wide awake instantly. "Did you hear that?" he asked. I told him I did. I was not that freaked out at first. I told him it was probably just a red fox or maybe a bobcat. If you have never heard a fox scream in the woods at night, it sounds terrifyingly human. I have read about it in my coursework. I explained that to Alex and he just nodded. Though in the dark of the tent I could tell he was still tense. "Are you sure?" he said. "Yeah, pretty sure," I said. "They just do that." We sat there for a few minutes in silence. Nothing else happened. I still had to pee, but I decided I didn't need to go badly enough to wander around in the dark while a wildcat was vocalizing nearby. So I took my boots off and laid back down. About 20 minutes later, the scream happened again. This time it was louder, and it didn't come from the north ridge. It came from the east, directly across the creek. It was the exact same sound, a sustained, throat-tearing shriek. What bothered me was not just the noise, it was the location. Animals like bobcats and foxes usually vocalize as they move along a territory line, or they just stay put. But this sounded like it had covered a significant amount of rocky terrain in the dark in a very short amount of time, and it was deliberately moving around our perimeter. "That's closer," Alex whispered. "I know," I said. I reached into my side pocket and found my heavy tactical flashlight. I kept it off, but I just held it in my hand. It felt slightly better to hold something solid. We waited. The woods get incredibly quiet between sounds. There was not any wind, and I couldn't even hear the crickets anymore. Just the faint sound of the creek. I started trying to rationalize it in my head. I thought maybe there are two of them, two foxes calling back and forth. That would easily explain the location shift. It made sense. Then the third scream hit. It came from the south, the direction of the trail we had hiked in on, and it was so close I actually felt the vibration of it in my chest. I wouldn't have been more than 60 or 70 feet from the tent, just past the tree line where we had hung the beer bag earlier. The sound was so raw and loud that Alex physically flinched. The rationalization about two foxes evaporated. I knew it was the same source. It had circled us completely, moving from the north to the east to the south, and it was tightening the circle. Normal predators do not methodically circle a tent in the dark while screaming to announce their presence. Neither of us spoke. We just laid there frozen. I gripped the flashlight tightly. I kept staring at the nylon wall of the tent, waiting to see a shadow press against it from the outside. I didn't want to turn the light on and paint a target on us, so we stayed in the pitch black. I have never been so hyper aware of every single noise. I was listening for footsteps, snapping twigs, rustling leaves, but there was nothing. No sound of something heavy walking through the dry brush. Just absolute, dead silence after the scream. We stayed awake the rest of the night. Every time I shifted my legs, the rustle of the sleeping bag sounded deafening. Hours passed like that. My phone battery dropped to 20% by the time the nylon walls started turning grey with the sunrise. Once it was fully light and we could finally hear birds chirping again, the tension broke a little. We both agreed it was time to pack up and hike out a day early. We unzipped the tent and stepped outside. The campsite looked completely normal. No strange tracks we could immediately see. No weird disturbances. I told Alex I was going to grab the beer bag so we could get some breakfast bars. When I walked downwind to the hang site, I saw the paracord hanging slack. The stuff sack we used for our food was on the ground. It was completely shredded. Dehydrated meal packets were torn open, and there was oatmeal scattered everywhere. I sighed. Honestly, just thinking a black bear had somehow managed to get it after all, I looked up at the branch to see if the cord had snapped. The cord was perfectly fine, but on the trunk of the pine tree, high up were four massive, deep vertical gouges in the bend. Like I said, we hung that bag 12 feet in the air. To bypass the paracord system, an animal would have to climb the trunk and reach out. But these claw marks were on the trunk almost 15 feet off the ground, a good 3 feet higher than where the bag itself was hanging. We took a photo, packed up our garbage, and hiked the 6 miles back to the car in record time. On our way out of the park, we stopped at the local ranger station to report the food bag incident. The ranger at the desk was an older guy. He took our information, and when I mentioned the screaming, he nodded and said, "Folks and bobcats screams are really common in that area this time of the year." He also mentioned some recent bear activity near the backcountry sites. It sounded like a standard rehearsed response. But then I showed him the picture of the tree trunk on my phone and explained how high the paracord was rigid. He zoomed it on the gouges, stared at the screen for a long time, and handed the phone back to me without looking me in the eyes. He just said he would make a note of it. I have not gone camping since. People in some online hiking forums have brought up older stories about Mothman or whatever else in Appalachia when I mentioned it, but I don't buy into any of that. I just know what a normal predator is supposed to sound like, and I know that whatever tore open our food that night was too tall to be a bear.